Kia ora, I'm Erin J. Doyle. Welcome to my channel. Last week I shared my poem Windows, which I will link to here and down in the description. I was about to say up in the description. We're off to a strong start. So today I'm going to talk about the poem a little bit. So this might be a bit of a spoiler. Maybe this is something I should have been thinking, oh no, I'll take that to my grave so no one ever knows. But the truth about Windows is it's meaningless. It is a doodle. I wrote Windows, or at least the majority of it, while I was sitting in a compulsory tutorial when I was doing my master's degree, I believe. The tutorial was on how to use the library databases, and I think it might have leaked over into how to set up a Word document and referencing and that kind of thing. This tutorial was given by the science librarian. It was one that she gave many times throughout the year, sometimes as a compulsory component in a course or sometimes as just a thing that you could go along to if you had time. As a consequence, I had done this tutorial 3 times, once of my own volition and twice because it was a compulsory requirement for a course. So when I found myself in the same class for the 3rd time and she was using the same examples to teach the same content, I stopped paying attention and I started just doodling, and I guess because I'm a writer, doodling for me often involves words. So I just wrote a short description of the person who was in front of me, walking around and talking. I described Cheryl Ward, who has read the poem and given me her unreserved consent to do as I wish with it. She is aware that it's being published, she's quite happy. Just, you know, disclaimer, we haven't been a dick about this. So, the opening line of Windows is, Cheryl Ward has a lovely voice. That's literally what I was observing when I wrote that. I was listening to Cheryl Ward talk and I like the way she talks. That's it. So I describe Cheryl Ward's manner of speaking, and I mentioned that she's talking about the adaptations of horses because that was the example she was using in the class. She was showing how you would look up information on horse adaptations. So later, I talk about someone called Alice. And I mentioned that Alice talks about the genetics of cows. I put that in because it provided a nice linkage to Cheryl Ward talking about the adaptations of horses, but also because the Alice I'm describing was studying cows. I'm fairly certain there was a molecular component to her study. She's definitely working in agricultural research though. And I had a class with her, so I kind of often saw her talking to her friends and talking about her project. So that again was just kind of a real life observation that I just put in because it connected up with what Cheryl Ward was talking about. I say that Cheryl Ward looks like Alice. Fact. Alice is my mother's oldest friend, and Alice and Cheryl have similar haircuts, similar taste in clothes, similar build. They do look alike. This wasn't, you know, anything remarkable that I had connected. It was just, I was looking at this person and thinking, you know, she really reminds me of Alice. So I wrote that down. And then because I was talking about Alice, this reminded me of that other Alice that I shared a class with. So I described the other Alice. And so I ended up writing the first few stanzas of this poem about 3 real people who had these really clear linking things. They didn't know each other. Well, maybe Cheryl and Alice knew each other because they were at university together, but the connections between them were just kind of arbitrary in my head kind of things. I then threw in a description of someone called Jeff, and I think if you read the poem, it's clear that I don't care for Jeff. He was someone I was doing a group project with and he was a dick. So for some reason I obviously felt it was necessary to put him in and describe him. The description I've put of him is not specific in any way. I've just kind of portrayed someone who seems vaguely irritating because I found him irritating. I think if I wrote the poem now I'd probably leave Jeff out of it entirely because I don't think he adds anything to the piece, but nonetheless he's in there because he was obviously irritating me at the time of writing. I've then circled back a bit and returned to the topic of the second Alice. So in this poem I talk about Cheryl, Alice and then Alice, and then I talk about Alice, Alice and Cheryl, so it's kind of doubling back a little bit. So when I start talking about the second Alice, I mention that she talks about cows, providing a linkage with Cheryl. And then of course her name being Alice provides a linkage with the first Alice. So then I talk about the first Alice. Then I get into complete fiction land. When I say the first Alice doesn't care for cows or for horses, she much prefers her office. Her office has windows that overlook the city. I have no idea if Alice has an office. But I grew up kind of poor. Well, when I say kind of, I mean very. And Alice seemed very well off and very well to do. Would go and see her, and she was in a fancy house. She lived next door to a celebrity. She had a spa pool. She had 2 toilets in her house. Like, she was fancy. At least to my perception as a little kid who had nothing. So to me, describing her as a person who has an office with windows with a view, I mean, I don't know that that's true, but I don't think it was a big jump for my brain to go there. Saying that she doesn't care for horses or cows, probably fiction. I have no idea as to her opinions. I've just never seen her on a farm. I guess it kind of worked, but I wrote those lines to provide a connection with the fact that the 2 other women described in the poem actively discuss something very specific about those animals. So I've just kind of provided a linkage there, even though I've got her not caring about them. In having her in her office, I was then able to return to talking about Cheryl Ward in the context of Cheryl Ward's office, which I have been to. Now this might have just been because the library was being renovated at the time. Maybe this was a temporary situation, but when I went to go see Cheryl Ward in her office, she was in the basement. So of course she had no windows. And so I've mentioned that in the poem. The final part of the poem is Cheryl Ward's office is underground. Cheryl Ward has no windows. Accurate. At least at the time that I went to her office. I have mentioned that she has a picture of Jeff on her desk. No, she doesn't. But I did remember that she had photos of family. I didn't know anything about her family, but I just basically suggested that Jeff was one of those people because they're from the same country, and it just, again, was a very vague link in my head, and just kind of mentioning a linkage between Cheryl and the previously mentioned Jeff, even though it was fictional, allowed each of the people discussed in the poem to have various linkages. I really think I should have left Jeff out of the poem. I think he's only really discussed in one stanza and then kind of vaguely mentioned at the end. I think if he was gone completely, the poem would be exactly as it is. Like, not exactly as it is. It would be just as impactful as it is. It would be exactly what it is, but it wouldn't have this random distracting paragraph about some annoying person in the middle. But nonetheless, that made it through to the published version, so never mind. So yeah. That's windows. So now you know, windows kind of doesn't mean anything. There's no metaphor or simile, there's no symbolism, there's no message. I'm not trying to shed light on anything. I'm not trying to show a different perspective on anything. I was just collecting some random observations and linking them together, and then kind of exaggerating some of those linkages for the sake of structure at the end. Nonetheless, if you have any questions about windows or any of my other poems, whether that's about the writing process or anything else, let me know down in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. If you enjoyed this video, do remember to give it a like, and if you're new around here, maybe consider hitting subscribe and ringing that bell so you can stay up to date, and I'll see you next time. Bye!